Well, in 1859, Charles Dickens began his classic novel, A Tale of Two Cities, with these words. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Certainly the Hebrew people in the biblical area knew the best of times and the worst of times. In the 11th century BC, the Hebrew people entered a period of time known as the monarchy. And under the King Saul and David and Solomon, they thrived. They knew autonomy. They knew power. They knew wealth. They knew prestige. It was for the Hebrew people the best of times. But then things changed. In 931, when King Solomon died, the kingdom of Israel split into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom became Israel, and the southern kingdom became Judah. So after this long stretch of 100 years, of 120 years, of nothing but good times, the people of Israel found themselves split into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And then in 722, the Assyrians invaded the northern kingdom and defeated the Israelites. And in 587 BC, the Babylonians entered the southern kingdom, Judah, defeated it, ransacked Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and took thousands of Hebrew people off into captivity, known as the Babylonian captivity. The best of times. King Saul, King David, King Solomon, prestige, power, autonomy, wealth. And then the Assyrians come. And the Babylonians come. And the Hebrew people are taken into captivity, and it is the worst of times in their lives. And the prophet Isaiah in the 6th century BC dares to come along to this beleaguered people in the worst of times and tell them there's a word of hope. He says God is going to come. God will save you and God will restore you. And he does it in this wonderfully metaphorical way. He says the desert is going to blossom. It's going to bloom with greenery and with plants. Can you imagine that? The desert is going to blossom with greenery and with plants. And the dry land, he said, is going to burst with springs of water. Where everything was dry and arid and barren and worn, new life comes. And so the prophet Isaiah came in the 6th century again to this beleaguered people of Judah and said, your God is coming, your God is going to save you, your God is going to restore you. Just like the desert bursts forth in bloom and the dry land bursts forth in springs of water. I want us to think this morning about hope, about the Judeo-Christian understanding of hope. So let me share 4 insights. First of all, this. Judeo-Christian hope is not Pollyanna hope. Now, this is critical. Judeo-Christian hope is not Pollyanna hope. Now, what is Pollyanna hope? I saw it recently. I was flipping channels, and I will say this as kindly as I can say it. This will sound so condemning, but I want to say it as kindly as I can say it. I was flipping the channels, and I saw a TV preacher, and he was praying with a family. He had his arms around them. And this is the prayer he prayed with that family as I briefly watched that scene. He said, "Dear God, protect this family from all harm and all evil." God is going to promise you and promise me that he is going to protect us from all harm and all evil. You know that's not true. I have said countless times before that God does not promise you and God does not promise me immunity from the vicissitudes of life. Listen, godly people suffer. Godly people have disappointment and heartache and heartbreak. Godly people have moments just like every other human being of despair when life is hard enough. The message of the prophet Isaiah, the message of hope in the Judeo-Christian tradition, is not a Pollyanna hope. It's not a hope that's promising you and promising me that everything is going to go hunky-dory in our lives. Everything's going to fit the way we want it to fit. That's not the message. With you, I love the musical Les Miserables. And while I'm not very musically inclined, I love the message, I love the story, and I love the songs. One of the most haunting songs, as you so well know, of that great musical is sung by Fantine, and it's called I Dreamed a Dream. Remember the words? I dreamed a dream in time gone by when hope was high and life worth living. I dreamed that love would never die. I dreamed that God would be forgiving. And I was young and unafraid. But the tigers come at night with their voices soft as thunder as they tear your hope apart. I had a dream my life would be so different from this hell I'm living. So different now from what it seemed. New life has killed the dream I dreamed. Godly people have their dreams crushed. And godly people have their hopes fade. And godly people, like every other human being on earth, knows moments when we wonder if we can make it through. Judeo-Christian hope is not a promise that when God comes to help us, He is going to prevent us from having great difficulty in life. Which leads to the second insight. You need to be patient with God. Real hope in the Judeo-Christian tradition, learns to be patient with God. Now, Isaiah said God is going to come. God is going to restore you. God is going to save you. But he didn't say when. And he didn't say how fully. And he didn't promise that God's coming to save them would be on their timeline, their agenda, their priorities, and their plans. Don't we tend to do that? We want God to come on our timeline, our agenda, our priorities, and our plans. And that's not God's promise. It's tough to be patient with God, right? I mean, He promised He would come. He promised He would restore. He promised He would resave. That's what the prophet Isaiah says, and yet I wait. And I wait. And the healing doesn't come. The relationship isn't restored. The job isn't secure. The child is still detached. Life is still difficult. Annie Flint Johnson was a hymn writer in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and a poet, and she wrote a wonderful poetic piece that says it all. God has not promised skies always blue, flower-strewn pathways all our lives through. God has not promised sun without rain, joy without sorrow, peace without pain. God has not promised we shall not know toil and temptation, trouble and woe. He has not told us we shall not bear many a burden, many a care, but God has promised strength for the day, rest for the labor, light for the way, grace for the trials, help from above, unfailing sympathy, undying love. God hath not promised flower-strewn pathways all our life through. God has promised strength for the challenges, light for the way, power to face what we face. But we must be patient with God. Can we live so fully in hope that we don't expect God to come on our terms, our timeline, our plans, our desires? Which leads to the third insight. Sometimes hope is eternal hope. Sometimes we just rest in the assurance that God will someday make it all right. We rest in the promise that what isn't made right in this life is made right in the life to come. You believe that, don't you? You do believe in the depths of your soul, don't you, that someday healing will come, someday restoration will come, someday justice will come, someday love will come, someday goodness will come, if not in this life, in the life to come. I've shared before the story of Joey and Rory Feek. They are a bluegrass and country music team, or were a bluegrass and country music team. I shared with you part of their story last year that Joey Feek was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And I shared their faith story along the way. Well, Joey Feek died in March of that cervical cancer that she'd battled for 2 years, in and out of remission and out of treatment. And so I went back when I read that a few months ago and pulled out a quote she had while she was battling this cervical cancer. Now keep in mind, this is a couple who battled this for 2 years, in remission, out of remission, in treatment, out of treatment. Then they finally get the word in November of last year from the doctor, the cancer is terminal. And here's what Joey Feek said. I wasn't mad at God. I wasn't upset. I was just greatly disappointed. I really thought we had it. I thought, I'm going to be that exception. I'm going to be that statistic that stands out and says, she fought it. We did the most extreme surgery we can do, and she did well. But for whatever reason, it wasn't enough, and God had different plans. I was disappointed. I was exhausted. I pray that one morning I just don't wake up. But I don't fear anything because I'm so close to God, and we've talked about it so many times. I know He's close. And I know He loves me, and I'm really at peace. And you know what Rory, her husband, said in summing up their faith? He said, Joey is at peace because she knows where she's going. No healing today. Treatments have done all they can do, but healing is coming. Restoration is coming. God will make all things right. And sometimes we just rest in the confidence that what isn't made right in this life is made right in the life to come. That what doesn't change today will change tomorrow. That what isn't corrected today, God will correct someday. Have that kind of faith in God, that while you are patient with Him, you trust in Him, that it will be right someday. And then finally, we hope in the one who has come. Remember the 9th chapter of the book of this prophet, these meaningful words for us. To us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on His shoulders, and He will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of His government and peace, there will be no end. This season, this Advent season, where do we stake our hope? In a divided, fractured, war-torn, hostile world, in a culture and a society where we are at odds at each other's throats almost. Where do we stake our claim? Advent says, stake your claim in the one who has come. Stake your claim in the Palestinian who walked the paths of Palestine and who, as Son of God, brought to you and me the message of love and goodness and kindness and caring and compassion. That's where I stake my claim today, this season. I stake it on the one who came to say, love wins. Goodness wins. Kindness wins. Compassion wins. To us a child is born. To us a son is given. To us a witness is made that the answer to all the heartache of our modern society and of our broken world is the life and the witness and our life and witness in His name. You know, I began with Charles Dickens. Let me end with Charles Dickens. Remember the scene where the Scrooge, bah humbug, bah humbug, bah humbug, Christmas, has a conversation with his nephew Fred. And here's what Fred says about Christmas after the bah humbug, bah humbug. Here's Fred. I've always thought of Christmas time, apart from the veneration due its sacred name and origin, as a good time. A kind, loving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers on the grave. Said Fred, like Jesus, a good time. A kind time, a forgiving time, a charitable time, a time when we think of one another as brothers and sisters on the journey together. I like you, Fred, because you remind me that the one who came is the hope of the world, and that the one whom we claim this season is the hope of our lives and of our culture and of our society. In Him is the answer to it all. The desert will blossom, greenery, plants, and the dry land will burst forth with springs of water, said the prophet Isaiah. God will come. God will save. God will restore. That doesn't mean, as you so well know, that everything is going to go our way. Right? It means we learn to be patient with God while in His time, by His agenda, He brings His promise. And it means we have a conviction about the future. If it's in God's hands, it's in good hands. And it means the hope of the world has already come. And we claim Him and stake our lives on Him this very season. There lies our hope. Would you stand as we sing our affirmation song together?